Time to abandon ship.
Oh no!
Here we go.
Can I persuade you to join us for a drink? It's a tradition.
Here, here.
Jar Jar, homie, my main man, quickly. Before the Separatists attack, get into the escape pod.
Fett! This is escape, then we're the pod.
Welcome back to Star Wars Escape Pod. We have another What Happened episode today, chatting all about the darksaber origins, Mandalorian Jedi origins, and the character of Tarre Vizla. What happened there, and a lot of speculation on Mandalorian Season 3, what we could see with the return of the darksaber in Din Djarin's hands, the live-action Sabine Wren that we're going to see in the Ahsoka show and going forward in those shows. So much stuff to talk about, and we're really looking forward to doing that. I'm your host, Josh, and our co-host, Blake, is joining us for the ride. Thanks for tuning in. Let's do it.
Another happy landing.
You were just a baby, so you couldn't come, but Father brought me here to see the statue of Tarre Vizla, the ancient Mandalorian ruler. Huh. Amazing, right? So much history and hope in one carving.
Hello, hello.
Hi, good to be here.
Good to have you back, as always. That was a little audio clip there from Star Wars Rebels. Actually, sorry, a clip from Star Wars Forces of Destiny. Did you watch that ever?
No, I assumed that was Sabine talking.
Yeah, that was Sabine talking. Okay. It's a clip from Star Wars Forces of Destiny, which was geared at younger girls who were very much into dolls / Barbies, that kind of age group. I guess Lucasfilm just thought, let's make a girl toy lineup, and it failed miserably. I guess because you can't buy those anymore, but the Forces of Destiny lineup was basically like a Star Wars Barbie, but not by Mattel. It was like I guess it was maybe Hasbro or something that was making them.
Okay, but it's Star Wars in theme, so
yes, it was called Star Wars Forces of Destiny, and it was just dolls that were stylized to look like Barbies, and a lot of them were like Ahsoka, Padme, Leia, Sabine, like a lot of pronounced kind of female characters that you could buy like Barbies for, right? And I think they did have other characters as well. Like I think you could buy some like droid, like 3PO or something. Like I vaguely remember what was available. Obviously it's kind of not the thing that I would be buying, but yeah, it's along with the Barbie lineup or with the doll lineup, they did a YouTube show, like a YouTube series called The Forces of Destiny, which were a series of
part. At least I remember the Rey one.
Yeah, there was a Rey one. There was like, and it was all these like little 2 to 3-ish minute YouTube free videos that they put out on the Star Wars YouTube channel. And there would be one that would drop every week or every couple days when this toy lineup came out. And they did like 2-ish seasons, I think. I think it was 2 seasons, but
okay. And they're just shorts, like
yeah, they're just shorts. Yeah, like 2 or 3 minutes each. So it took me no time to blast through all of them at one point. One of them is, and they're technically canon. And they all kind of take place in these little segments between all the other parts of what we know to be canon, which consists of comics, books, video games, movies, TV shows, all the stuff, right? Audiobooks and everything. So these little 2 to 3 minute shorts are in fact canon, and they do explain some little things. Like there was one more notable one was how Leia gets the was it Bouche costume? Bosch?
Bouche. Yeah.
The bounty hunter costume that she wears. The Jabba's palace disguise that she wears. Who that is a character. Yeah. He's holding a thermal detonator.
For all those listening and didn't know what we're talking about.
That disguise that she wears, there's a whole 2 to 3 minute short that takes place where Leia gets this disguise and how that happens and everything like that, and it all just kind of, it happens very quickly, and it's the kind of story that, given a full length Marvel comic or something, it could have been played up way better. But you know, I think it's just like little things that they're like, oh hey, let's just do that in a short. Let's just do this, do that. Like there was even one short that they did. Yeah, there was one short that they did, and I think I may have mentioned this way earlier on a podcast episode, like maybe months ago, but when we did the Ewok Adventures commentary, and there was I mentioned one of these Forces of Destiny episodes gave a canonicity to the big giant from Ewok Adventures, the big Gorax or whatever it's called, the giant thing that from the first one. Yeah, from the first Ewok Adventures movie, which is Legends, but they canonized that thing in the Forces of Destiny short and explain why the Ewoks have all these booby traps set up before the Empire comes. And it's actually because they use those things to defend themselves against these giant creatures, but who eat Ewoks. And in the Ralph McQuarrie concept artwork for the Star Wars films, there's actually a painting of his that he did of this monster that never showed up in the movie, and they used it for Ewok Adventures, and now later in the canon they've used it for one of these shorts. So they're like that. So if anyone's got like an hour to burn to watch like these little Star Wars shorts, they're not half bad. I mean, you can't really expect too much of them, but yeah,
it's canon, so you're gonna learn something.
Yeah, exactly. So one of them was based around the Star Wars Rebels era. They did Clone Wars, they did Rebels, they did original, prequel, everything, sequels, all that stuff. So one of them was based around the Star Wars Rebels. I don't know where it fits into place, probably between some of the episodes that Sabine is on Mandalore, and she takes her Tristan.
This is after she has the darksaber, I assume.
I believe it's around that same time. Yeah, it's around the same time that she's kind of like learning how to use it and stuff, and like comes face to face with her family again and all that. And she goes to see the statue of Tarre Vizla with Tristan, who I'm totally mind blanking if that's her brother or not. It's somebody that I'm pretty sure it's her brother or something.
I think it's her brother as well. Yeah.
Because
she meets her whole family.
That's right. Yeah. So, that's right. Yeah. So, her brother Tristan and her go to see, they're kind of doing some scouting. I don't know what they're doing. It's like cuts in the middle of some action, and they come across this big, huge statue of Tarre Vizla, and there's a bunch of stormtroopers around it and stuff. And then they're like, oh, we got to save the sacred statue. So let's, kill all the stormtroopers or whatever, which Star Wars Rebels, they don't kill anybody. So whatever. But it shows the statue, and she's like, this thing has got so much history to it and everything. So the clip that you heard at the very beginning, that's a little segment from Forces of Destiny. And I just realized I spent over 8 minutes talking about Forces of Destiny, which
that's a lot. I will say, it's
never saw that coming.
Longer than the show itself.
So let's listen to our little clip from Star Wars Rebels, though, about Tarre Vizla, who's the kind of the focus of today's What Happened show, and just why this What Happened episode is happening at all is because Mandalorian brought into the live action this very fan favorite weapon known as the darksaber, which was introduced to canon in the Clone Wars, and actually wasn't even a thing at all in Legends until George Lucas made it a thing, and I'll talk about that later. But
yeah, we could get into that later, but I was very surprised by that.
Yeah, very cool stuff. But so it was made for Clone Wars, and then was later brought up in Star Wars Rebels, and then was given a big long history as to what that thing is, and that clip is what we're going to listen to now before we continue to talk about Tarre Vizla and the darksaber together. So let's take a listen.
You wanted to speak with me?
I've got something to show you.
What's this about? A lightsaber?
Not just any lightsaber.
It can't be.
So you recognize it?
That I do. It is the darksaber, a symbol for the leader of House Vizsla, and later the group known as Death Watch.
I didn't know Mandalorians developed a type of lightsaber.
We didn't. This was one of a kind. Legend tells that it was created over 1,000 years ago by Tarre Vizla, the first Mandalorian ever inducted into the Jedi Order. After his passing, the Jedi kept the saber in their temple. That was until members of House Vizsla snuck in and liberated it. They used the saber to unify the people and strike down those who would oppose them. At one time, they ruled all of Mandalore wielding this blade. This saber is an important symbol to that house and respected by the other clans. I imagine Sabine was excited to recover it.
You wouldn't know it. After we got back from Dathomir, she gave it to me for safekeeping and hasn't brought it up since.
She doesn't want the responsibility. Kanan, if Sabine can wield this saber, she can reunite one of the most powerful houses in all of Mandalore.
You're talking about raising an army.
With Sabine leading it.
All right, so that's from Star Wars Rebels. Sabine finds the darksaber in Darth Maul, or Crimson Dawn Maul's old hideaway and on Dathomir before he obviously gets stranded on Malachor, and then we know what happens from there. He goes to Tatooine and everything like that. It has his final, spoiler alert, as a final confrontation with Obi-Wan Kenobi before he dies in the desert. But yeah, before all that happened, I guess, or after that happened, Sabine finds his old darksaber that he won from Pre Vizsla in the Clone Wars on his hideaway. And before we talk about Tarre Vizla, what are your thoughts on the darksaber? Because yeah, you're surprised that this was introduced by George Lucas in the Clone Wars, and there's actually a little thing I grabbed off of the Wikipedia saying that it was intended Pre Vizsla in the Clone Wars used a vibroblade, like a familiar weapon that's known now in canon as well, because they introduced them finally in the Clone Wars.
It took long enough.
But yeah, in the EU they were super popular. Any Star Wars RPG player is going to know what vibroblades are as well. They're just knives a melee
weapon that's not a lightsaber. Needed something.
It's a knife that vibrates at high frequencies to make cutting a lot better. Yeah. So in Clone Wars, technically they did have knives. They just never vibrated. So there's a question as to whether or not they were just not knives or vibroblades. But anyway, George Lucas decided he wanted Pre Vizsla to have some sort of lightsaber variant. And then they came up with a black bladed lightsaber that they called the darksaber. So that was kind of a cool little, side effect of George wanting something different for Pre Vizsla, who Jon Favreau voices and stuff, which is awesome.
Okay. First question. Yeah. Did this come out, the idea of the darksaber in Clone Wars, did that come out before or after the first Force Unleashed? Because the first Force Unleashed game, you can get a black lightsaber.
So when was Force Unleashed released again?
That's what I was wondering. I think it's like 2007.
Let's take a look. Okay, so season 2 of Star Wars: The Clone Wars aired between 2009 fall and the next year spring in 2010. So that was season 2, and that's when the darksaber was first introduced, which was the Mandalore arc, known in season 2, episode 12, the Mandalore plot, which carries through to season 2, episode 14, Duchess of Mandalore. So it was those 3 episodes that the darksaber kind of made its appearance in with Pre Vizsla. And so yeah, we're looking at solid February 2010. Force Unleashed came out 2 years.
2008.
2 years prior to that.
So George copied Force Unleashed then.
Yeah, so I guess yeah, it must have taken some sort of inspiration from that. Yeah, I mean, it's not the first time.
The blade itself looks exactly the same. Where it's normally white, the whole thing is black, and then it has white glowing on the outside of it.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it's not flat, and it doesn't look like a katana. It just looks like a regular lightsaber. But the blade, artistically, looks the same.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So then, I guess Force Unleashed might have something to do with that, because
that's why I had always assumed it was an EU thing that they used in the game.
George, it's not the first time that George has taken stuff from comic books and other sources and said, "Oh, I like that," and then make it into a thing. So,
true.
Ayla Secura is a good example of that, as well as Quinlan Voss, who showed up in a comic before they made him a character cameo in Phantom Menace. But Ayla Secura was the Twi'lek blue Twi'lek Jedi in Attack of the Clones, and who plays her actually is George's one of his production assistants or something on set, is the actress for Ayla Secura and stuff. But he saw her on the cover of a comic book at one point and decided he liked that, and it's like, yeah, let's just make that a Jedi character. It was something like that. It was like that, or yeah, I'm pretty sure that was it. And then
he was so happy about it. He tried to kill her off 3 times.
The rumor is that Darth Talon, who's also a Twi'lek Sith character, was supposed to be in his sequel trilogy with Darth Maul. But of course, that's not really confirmed, but that's kind of the general consensus of,
that'd be interesting.
At least I don't think it's confirmed. I'm going to need to relook over that information, but
rumors floating around now that she's going to show up in like Mandalorian season 3 or something.
Well, that'd be pretty nuts. Yeah.
Because I think they wanted that. I can't remember where the basis of this rumor is, but I think the main concept is someone with a lightsaber to fight against Ahsoka.
That would kind of make sense because there's nobody right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know who would train her, though.
Yeah, that's where it gets very complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
So, darksaber, long history. This thing, the darksaber.
Oh, I did have one other thing I wanted to bring up about the darksaber, because I read a little bit about it here. And from what we heard, if this is all the canon, where is it established that if you have the darksaber, then you're Mandalore? In the chat here, the recording said that Sabine could use it to unite a single clan to get back together. Yeah. But when we watch Mandalorian season 2, it seems like if you have it, you are Mandalore.
Yeah. So in the Clone Wars, that was when they first introduced the idea, the holder of the darksaber and the conqueror of the owner of the darksaber gets the right to rule Mandalore. That's what causes the division in Death Watch, where Bo-Katan, who served the Vizsla clan at the time, Death Watch being, that is, Pre-Vizsla dies at the hands of Maul during the Clone Wars, and then she kind of rebels and says, no outsider will ever rule Mandalore. And she hates the fact that a non-Mandalorian just killed the Mandalorian who owns the darksaber and now is legally able to rule the planet. So she rebels, splitting and dividing Death Watch in 2. So half the Death Watch are with her and a half are with, a section of Death Watch is with her and the rest are with Pre-Vizsla, right? So that's what leads to the finale of the Clone Wars that we saw with Captain Rex and Ahsoka helping Bo-Katan's group reclaim Mandalore, because those are the ones that didn't believe that Maul should have the right to even try to get that in the right in the first place. So the idea was introduced there. The history of that idea, though, comes from Tarre Vizla being the very first ever Mandalorian to become a Jedi. And as far as we know, probably still the only one to become a Jedi, because we know that a big event happened in the EU. So it's kind of referred to in canon, but the details are in the EU. But basically in canon, it's established there is a Mandalorian Jedi war that happens called the Mandalorian Jedi Wars, and it's basically a series of wars fought between the Jedi and the Mandalorians, and you know, they're ancient enemies. That's established in the Mandalorian show as well, that Mandalorians and Jedi never get along.
The basis of the KOTOR game, the first one. So that game takes place immediately after that war has just ended, as Revan was the Jedi who led the Jedi against the Mandalorians. Yeah, that's right. So the final war between both groups resulted in the devastation of Mandalore. And in the Clone Wars, when we actually see Mandalore, and in Star Wars Rebels, we see it as well, we see kind of a desolate white planet. And
the location that most of the action takes place on in the finale, as well as most of the show, is in like this sphere, like a bubble, which is an entry to kind of going lower into the planet, where they've hollowed out the planet, I guess, and made a city under there called Sundari City, which is the capital of Mandalore. And because the whole surface is decimated, it was basically just bombarded by Republic gunships.
Yeah, it was Revan's call to do that.
Yeah, so like they questionable decision on behalf of the Jedi, but Mandalore, they glassed the planet like it's uninhabitable unless you really dig deep. But Mandalorians, being very faithful people to their homeworld, decided to make do with what they got left and still thrived there, in different ways in these bubble cities.
Yeah, and they also live on the moon, if I'm not mistaken. The moon.
Yeah, they have the moons around Mandalore also inhabited. Yeah, and those are relatively unscathed because Obi-Wan goes to one of those moons in the Clone Wars when he sees Pre Vizsla, the Prime Minister, who's the Prime Minister of that moon, and he visits there. So we actually see it as viewers as well, what those moons look like, and they're fine. So it's just the home planet that's ruined. But
so I guess we kind of brushed over the history of Tarre Vizla there.
Yeah,
there's not a lot more to it, really.
No, not really. And and that being said, there's almost more history given about the darksaber, if anything else. Let's take a listen to another clip from Star Wars: The Clone Wars when Obi-Wan fights Pre Vizsla for the first time.
For generations, my ancestors fought proudly as warriors against the Jedi. Now, that woman tarnishes the very name Mandalorian. Defend her, if you will. This lightsaber was stolen from your Jedi temple by my ancestors during the fall of the Old Republic. Since then, many Jedi have died upon its blade. Prepare yourself to join them.
Okay, so whoever reclaimed the darksaber from the Jedi Temple obviously had means to use it against the Jedi while the Mandalorians were fighting the Jedi. So I'm assuming Tarre Vizla died before the Mandalorian Jedi Wars. Then someone from the Vizsla clan stole it during the fall of the Old Republic. And after that time period passed, the Mandalorian leader, which wielded the darksaber, used it as the primary weapon of their choice to lead the Mandalorians and against the Jedi.
So also between that timeline then of when they stole the darksaber from the Jedi archives or whatever, and when we see it, I guess, in Clone Wars, somewhere along that line, it becomes, I guess, identified as if you have the darksaber, then you're the ruler. Because obviously when it was first created, that wasn't the intent. It was only after it was stolen.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just because if you think about it, it's just some guy who made a lightsaber, and it's an awesome lightsaber, but it's just some guy who made a lightsaber and he just happens to be Mandalorian. When that guy dies, the Jedi are like, oh, well, let's just keep the lightsaber here with all the other fallen Jedi's lightsabers. We'll just wherever they keep them. And then boom, temple gets invaded. The Vizsla house clan is part of that invasion. They steal the lightsaber back, knowing that it's rightfully one of their own creations. The leader of that clan probably just takes possession of that thing. And to the Vizsla clan, that is now a sign of leadership. And out of the Vizsla clan, much later on, of course, you get the Death Watch clan coming out of that, which also look to the darksaber for leadership. Additionally to that, some point, like you say, along those 1,000 years, the Vizsla clan must have been a very important clan within the Mandalorian circles, because for them to then influence other clans to look at their leader for
that's
leadership.
Kind of what I'm thinking right now too.
Yeah,
there's got to be a jump there, because you get other clans now to rally behind this guy because he has a specific weapon, which seems like a bit of a stretch to me, but
it's like I think a Game of Thrones in this sense, where you have the main big house families, like you have the Starks and the Lannisters and everything, right? the Targaryens. And then you have like the smaller families that kind of, they're like allies and they have a lot of history with the main house families. And it's because they're like, that's like the cousin family that has something loose connections with that main family, but they're not really part of that family, have their own flag and logo and everything. That's kind of like what I think of
cultures. They're more like tribes.
Yeah. So they're more like tribes, but like the way I think of it is there's the Vizsla clan, which is like, you know, like, or in Harry Potter's modern, in Harry Potter tongue, you might call them like the full blood, like the true wizard full bloods, right? Like the Malfoy family, right? You know, 100% pure blood wizard, right? So that's kind of like the Vizsla clan. Like if you're a Vizsla, you're probably and most likely 100% Mandalorian and look at the darksaber as like the end all be all. Whoever holds this shall rule me and the planet that I call home, right? Whereas if you're part of another clan, you may or may not look at it that way, depending on how things are.
Them, as like competition, or
but right, they're obviously a much bigger house, so
they're always
you're just kind of sucked into it. Yeah, exactly.
But obviously, there's going to be people without the name Vizsla who fight for Clan Vizsla, right? So,
right. Yeah. And, you know, and Bo-Katan is a great example of that. And speaking of that, it's important to remember that when we are introduced to the darksaber in the Clone Wars, Mandalore is not being ruled by someone who wields the darksaber at this point in time. So obviously in that 1,000 years, yes, the official Mandalorian perspective upon the Vizsla leader or whoever has the darksaber is like the leader of Mandalore. That perspective shifted eventually, and when Satine, the Duchess of Mandalore, came into, you know, rulership of the planet, that whole mentality was out the window. So I'm not really sure when that happened or when the cutoff was that the leader of Mandalore wields the darksaber, because Satine didn't have the darksaber. Vizsla had it that entire time. So either it's his father or his like great grandfather or whatever, like at some point the rulership changed. The leader of the darksaber no longer became the leader of Mandalore. But then with the whole shift in the Clone Wars that happened, that mentality of Death Watches, like their whole goal to like bring back the original Mandalore mentality and their belief system, like that whole thing came back, and then so did the respect for the darksaber, if that makes any sense.
I mean, it does on paper, but if you think about the peoples and who the people follow, it's very convoluted.
Yeah, it is. Like, it's a lot to follow.
All you need to bow down to the darksaber, whoever wields it. Okay, now that doesn't matter anymore. We're going to just follow this woman who's a pacifist. Okay, now we're going back to the darksaber idea again. That was bad. Let's go back to the darksaber thing.
I think it's like one of those things that, I mean, this is what's so interesting about Star Wars and George Lucas and his political system that he just thinks of. And because like, if you think about it, it's like, man, you watch something like Clone Wars, which is, I mean, in reality, it's geared for younger viewers, right? Like it's intended to be kind of like a preteen show, like teenagers, obviously not R-rated, like most of the great shows these days. It's, you know, Star Wars is made for kids, right? So if you think about it though, like it's so rooted in our reality in a lot of ways. And that's where Star Wars is so authentic to so many of us hardcore fans, because, you know, when you root something in something that's real, it's just more viable, more believable. And their political system is a real working political system, right? Like you've got kings and queens on some planets, and other planets you have a prime minister or a duchess or just a senator or something like that, a representative, right? Like you have all these different figures within the Republic, and then the separatists, you know, the Confederacy of Independent Systems, and all these other things, right? So amongst this political chaos, right, what we take from way back in Star Wars history, where you had, you know, this Mandalorian Jedi who was a Jedi and not the leader of the Mandalorians, at some point they had a different political system with a different ruler, right? War breaks out. This Jedi's long gone. War breaks out, and whoever's invading the temple, decides this is ours again, part of the Vizsla clan. Then at some point you have this shift of, whoa, everyone in the Vizsla clan's looking to this one guy for leadership and everything, and they're the dominating clan, and maybe he is a good ruler. Let's just kind of let them rule stuff. And then maybe they evolve into the leader of Mandalore for X amount of hundreds of years. That system falls away eventually, like how we're living in Canada. Like, we don't really look at the Queen of England as our literal queen like they do in England. And authority. Like the monarch it's a weird, complicated thing, right? Like, she's on our coins, and yes, she's our queen, but do we look at her as a political figure in our system? Not really. So it's one of those weird things where it's like, oh, the leader of the darksaber at this point in time, Satine's ruling. So for a while now, it's been the fact that the darksaber has kind of been forgotten about, and no one really cares about whoever wields it anymore. But when Pre Vizsla comes back, do you remember that big political push that he has with the people? He has to stage Death Watch to look like heroes. That's right. Yeah, and he hires he makes that shadow collective group with all the other crime syndicates, and
Darth Maul goes and he collects all of the crime syndicates in 24 hours. That's
right. Yeah, and it's actually Maul's plan that he's using Pre Vizsla for, but in Pre Vizsla's mind, it's kind of the opposite way. Anyway,
they both
it gets complicated.
Each other.
Yeah, they're all just using each other for stuff like villains do. But Pre Vizsla's goal is to his goal from the beginning of the show is to become the leader of Mandalore and keep it that way, right?
The old ways,
yeah, bring back the old ways, right? That's what Death Watch stands for, and he goes about it in a very terrorist kind of way, and not a political kind of way, but he's actually such a great character when you think about it, because this is a guy who wants to bring back the old ways. And he's kind of like doing a Palpatine thing where he's kind of working behind the scenes to make sure that his influence is in that system already as the prime minister of one of the moons of Mandalore. So he's already whispering in Duchess's ear and all that stuff, right? He's kind of like making his side deals with Dooku and everything.
It's also interesting because Dave Filoni kind of reversed it, because people know Mandalorians and like Mandalorians as these warriors. These warrior clans with this badass armor, and he started with them as pacifists. So in the new canon, we met them as pacifists. I mean, everyone really upset and angry about this.
That's right.
In the villain to bring back the old ways of the warrior ways.
Yeah, it's the warrior ways.
The bad guys fighting for what the fans want.
It actually makes a lot of sense though, because when you watch the prequels, the Mandalorian culture and the group in general, aside from Jango Fett and Boba and stuff that make their appearance in Attack of the Clones, aside from that, there's no mention of the Mandalorians at all in the Star Wars films. It's all in supplement material, right? Mm-hmm. So when George did the movies, he wasn't really thinking of that. He wasn't caring about that. He didn't really want anything. He's orchestrating this whole thing, this whole war between two factions, until you really get into the TV show and the Clone Wars had time to explain that. The films didn't have the time of day to get into, oh, here's another group that's also trying to do their own thing over here and whatever, right? We don't have time for that. So that's why Clone Wars is so awesome, because it gets into all these other stories and is able to flesh out this amazing planet and history and everything like that. So yeah, like you say, I guess there had to have been some sort of arc for that plot, and to bring those characters and that planet and that history into the canon. It's okay, well, if this is a race of people that normally war against the Jedi, how are we supposed to work that into this whole Clone Wars era plot line, and where does it fit, right? And how do we make that happen again?
Yeah,
how do we make fans happy? Yeah,
more depth to a race of people that are just mercenaries. yeah,
exactly. So obviously, I guess the natural thing to do was tear them down and build them up again, and that seems to be a thing with any character that's kind of been overdeveloped at some point. They start fresh. They scrap what they did in the story, and then they rebuild that character back up again, and one more lesson to learn kind of thing or whatever. So yeah, with the Mandalorians, like it was weird when you first kind of saw, oh, it's a pacifist planet now. That's totally not what I remember them to be in the expanded universe stuff.
Yeah,
Star Wars Legends.
When I first heard that, I felt like it was someone who just didn't understand what Mandalorians were supposed to be. They're just like spitting on fans.
Yeah.
I didn't know who Dave Filoni was at the time. I didn't look into any of this. And it was very early on in the series. I was like, what is this garbage? Like, why are they wrecking this?
I remember us having a conversation like that years ago.
And because like, I think you told me about it. And the only thing I had seen was the animated movie for the beginning of the series, and it was so bad. And then you tell me that they ruined Mandalorians. Like, what are they doing with this cartoon? They're just destroying everything.
Yeah,
Jabba has a kid. There's some weird little like alien girl who's now like following Anakin around with all these stupid comments. and then Mandalorians.
And then out of that show ended up being not only the best animated show I think I've ever seen, but out of that we've had so many good things come out of Clone Wars. I mean Star Wars Rebels kind of came out of Clone Wars, and obviously our live action shows we've been getting are directly influenced by Clone Wars and Rebels now at this point in time. Even Solo brought Maul back in his existing timeline of, yes, he's still alive at this point, but a lot of people didn't watch the animated show, so they had no idea that it was coming. And I didn't know it was coming, and I watched the movie. I was like, oh, that makes me really happy that they put him in there, because this works, like this is perfect. But yeah, to bring in this giant group of people, this like Mandalorian race, this culture, these legends, this history and everything like that, to build it up like that. Clone Wars did a fantastic job for bringing that into the continuity that we're familiar with.
Yeah, it did a good job. I have to say, it came a long ways. I now trust Dave Filoni quite a lot. When I first watched that early stuff, though, I don't know. They pulled it off.
There's actually an interesting quote here from Dave Filoni, which I'll just read real quick. He says, "The Mandalorian Jedi War that I have in my mind is very much derived from the oldest style of thinking of Mandalorians, which was that their weapons, their arsenal, their technology had a massive increase once they collided with the Jedi and found these force-wielding people that had abilities they didn't understand. Their armor is a reaction to the Jedi, and I've always believed that because that seemed to be something that would be in the DNA of the Joe Johnston designs of them as super commandos. Their arsenal was very much designed to combat Jedi. For example, I wouldn't know the details of the conflict that the fans have referred to. I played the video games though, so I'm aware of it in the games, and I like a lot of the things in there. So when there are all these things in common and there's just stuff people know, I think, well, why don't we use that? And that's why we love Dave. He goes to where fans love things the most and digs deeper. But I also want to point out that the Joe Johnston designs of Super Commandos were referring to, we talked about the legacy of Boba Fett not long ago with Jessica, a member of the Boba Fett fan club, and we brought up in that episode that the original design for Boba Fett, which is technically the first idea of what a Mandalorian would look like eventually, was intended to be an Imperial Super Commando, which was like a special version of a Stormtrooper, and designed to combat Jedi like Luke Skywalker or the heroes of the rebellion. And eventually evolved into a cool looking bounty hunter, and that evolved into something else, and now we have an entire planet race of people. Yeah, exactly. So being that original design, like Dave just digs right to the root and understands why this is a thing, right? And like why that eventually evolved into this, which is why Mandalorians wear armor, right? That's made of metal that can combat a lightsaber that no one else in the galaxy can forge or figure out, because it's a thing that's lasted for thousands of years at this point. And, all this history just kind of builds layer upon layer upon layer. And it's really going to be interesting to see how the Mandalorian show continues this legacy of Tarre Vizla and the darksaber and the mentality of the right to rule Mandalore, all that stuff. It's going to be awesome.
Do you think they're going to get into his character? Because we basically read his blurb. There's not a lot to it at this point. He's just kind of referenced a bit, but that's honestly a character that should be fleshed out at some point. It's a really neat concept.
It is a neat concept. And the fact that this darksaber, which almost like it's, you know, it's kind of like the One Ring, right? Like it's like, it wasn't, well, maybe it's not like the One Ring, but okay, this lightsaber was designed with good intentions because Tarre Vizla was a Jedi. And as we know the Jedi to be protagonists most of the time for most of Star Wars, you know, Tarre Vizla was a force sensitive human who was a Mandalorian and was inducted into the Jedi Order from a young age, became a Jedi, grew up as a Jedi, died as a Jedi. And his lightsaber was made to be his lightsaber. Like it's a Jedi weapon, right? So at what point did that become almost like a source of corruption within the Mandalorians as what then became protagonists of the story when they invaded the Jedi Temple, stole it back? It became their icon of leadership in a way, which is kind of ironic because it's designed to be a Jedi's weapon, which is supposed to be a positive person to look up to. And these Mandalorians come in and they look up to their own, of course, but to the rest of the galaxy,
they see Jedi as the enemy.
Yeah, they see Jedi as the enemy, and they take this iconic Jedi weapon and turn it into something else, and they turn it into their own thing. And because it's got its own look and everything, it works for the purpose of doing so in the story. But I've always found that kind of interesting how they took something that's meant to be this heroic weapon, much like how the Sith use the same weapon as well, but it's red. You know, the color inflicts the side of the Force that they use in a way, right? Like you begin to associate red with darkness, right?
Yeah, and I've been sitting here questioning that exact thing. So Jedi have bright colors, and if he's a Jedi, why is it black? And how did that happen? Yeah, because traditionally, it was crystals. You would find crystals, and the crystals are just his color. So you could say it's a rare crystal he found. But that's not the case anymore. Now it's from the bonding of the Jedi and the crystal. So what happened?
So, okay, this is not canon or legends or anything. I'm just kind of throwing a theory out there. The crystal inside the darksaber could be unique to Mandalore itself, in which is a place that Jedi don't really go. Ever, you know, like even in the Clone Wars, the relationship between Mandalore and the Republic is very strained. Like the Duchess wants to trust the Republic and they're kind of part of the Republic, but at the same time, they're also kind of not, because she doesn't want the Jedi to interfere in their internal affairs. That's what she calls them, right? So my theory is that whatever is inside the darksaber is probably a resource found on Mandalore that's very hard to come by, obviously, especially after the planet's been scathed from this bombarding, right? So it might not be something you can find anymore. But my theory is that at the time of Tarre Vizla's existence, before the Mandalorian Jedi Wars, that he went back to his home planet when it came time to make a lightsaber, and he found a crystal on his home planet and used that. And being the first and only Mandalorian Jedi kind of makes sense. Planet gets destroyed. That resource is no longer available. Done. No more darksaber existing. No more crystals can be found to make it again. That's my theory.
Okay.
It's a pretty good theory.
We're still going back to the EU concept of there's different kinds of crystals.
Yeah, and they're in the canon they have introduced that idea a little bit. So
like depending on planets, because we know there's different planets with crystals, of kyber crystals.
Yes. So in the movies, obviously it's just, you know, like what George says, like lightsaber the green or lightsaber the blue. Right? But you know, Sam, you can have a purple one. But on Ilum, like, you know, now we know from Jedi Fallen Order, the campaign in that, as well as Clone Wars, and you know, now there's white lightsabers. Now there's neon green. Now there's whatever. Like there's like a whole array of colors now, and the High Republic introduced this as well. Like there's now a lot more familiarity with the fact that a lightsaber could be any color. So the color is really kind of, aside from the fact that red ones are the ones that have to be bled by a Force user, the weird kind of abstract glow of the darksaber and the shape and the glistening and the sound and everything like that, it's all just different. And that's why I think maybe it's not a kyber crystal necessarily, which is in Sith and Jedi's lightsabers. It's kyber crystal's a kyber crystal, right? But like what you were saying with the EU idea, you're talking about a concept that was introduced in the KOTOR games where you could use other stuff to be a lightsaber core. Is that right?
Well, in those games, you can modify your lightsaber with different parts. So you always have a kyber crystal as the source, but then you can modify it with different things. You use Krayt Dragon pearls. You can use Barab ores, which is like a type of metal.
Yeah.
So, and there's different crystals and stuff as well. And they all have different effects on the blade is the idea, but it's because it's an RPG, right? So you want to do modifications.
Right.
That's kind of the idea.
Yeah. So I guess the idea of having like a Krayt Dragon pearl in the lightsaber in the EU like that, like it's a concept that's like, okay, well, but that still had a kyber crystal in there, right?
In KOTOR games, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the only section of my theory that really doesn't hold up too well, is maybe this is the first ever lightsaber that doesn't have a kyber crystal, but
what if,
I don't know. But like,
what if the lightsaber is partially constructed with Beskar and that's the effect it has on the crystal?
The hilt. Oh, I can see the hilt being made of Beskar 100%.
And maybe because Beskar is known to stop lightsaber blades, it has this weird effect on it.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. It has kind of like a nice
flat.
ring. Yeah,
That's why the blade's flat.
Yeah. I feel you. And maybe that's why so the sound that it makes is like a little more glistening, like high pitch. Like that's
it is.
I don't know. Like I know that like when the lightsaber struck Din Djarin's Beskar armor, it made like a very unique sound as well. So yeah, maybe that's where that comes into play. I'm just spitballing here, but yeah, it's possible that. So it's ironic that we're talking about this character who was the first Mandalorian Jedi, and he makes this darksaber, which then later becomes an icon to the Mandalorian culture. Now we're watching a show in the timeline which takes place many hundreds, over 1,000 years later, thousands of years later. Yeah. And now we're looking at a show in which the story goes that a bounty hunter who he doesn't really care about the darksaber because he's not really part of that culture necessarily. We had this discussion in the last episode when we were talking about Boba Fett, how Din Djarin, even though he's a Mandalorian, he's not like a Mandalorian. Different belief system because he's like a splinter cell of the Death Watch or the Watch, I guess. Yeah, it's just a splinter cell of Mandalorian culture that decided to do its own thing at some point. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we take a Mandalorian show who's now taking the darksaber and putting it into the hands again of a Mandalorian who, I guess, could he rule Mandalore? Could he not? Kind of thing.
That's what we're waiting to find out.
I guess, yeah. And here's the other interesting thing. Mm-hmm. The Ahsoka show just cast their Sabine Wren actress for the live action Ahsoka show. That's going to tie into... Yeah. It's going to tie into Mandalorian season 3 as well as Book of Boba Fett. Ahsoka's that third show that takes place at the same time. And they've cast their live action version of Sabine Wren, which we know from Star Wars Rebels held and trained with the darksaber before at some point she gave it to Bo-Katan to lead Mandalore with. And then at some point between the shows and the movies, Moff Gideon comes in with the Empire, takes it from her or somebody because he ends up with it. And then now that situation is all resolved, Din Djarin wins it by besting him in a fight. Now he's got it, and Bo-Katan doesn't want to take it from him because of her belief system, but he doesn't really care about that. So it's going to be interesting, first off, to see what happens there. But secondly, Sabine is back. Like, you know, Sabine's back. Maybe she won't have a problem taking it from Din Djarin and using this lightsaber to rule Mandalore if she's up for it.
Who do you want to be Mandalore then? Sabine, Bo-Katan, or Din Djarin?
That's the thing. Like, I think, like, in talking about the evolution of this lightsaber, these characters, this culture, even though Din Djarin isn't part of the original Death Watch / Mandalore warrior belief system, he is a variation of a Mandalorian, and his mentality of, you know, there's not there's a purpose as to Grogu being in the show, right? Not just to look cute and cuddly and have this little companion that he's got to, you know, look after. You know, there's a reason why Grogu is what he is, and there's a reason why he's a Force user. There's also a reason why him helping Din Djarin take on the Mudhorn creature and being inducted into his clan, they become a 2-person clan at that point, right? And
2-man pack.
Yeah. And so we're now looking at the same character who's been taken away by Luke Skywalker to potentially be trained as a Jedi, and a character who was trained by the Jedi before the Clone Wars went down, before the Jedi Purge. So we're looking at a character again who comes from Jedi roots, who also has an influence on this character's life, that now wields the darksaber. And he's got a large amount of respect for Force users, obviously, having talked with Ahsoka, helped her with something, given Grogu up to Luke,
and was saved by Luke,
taken him to Tython and witnessing all the weird things there, and saved by Luke Skywalker and everything. Yeah, we're talking about a guy who's basically an ally to the Jedi, who's also a Mandalorian, very much like Sabine. And Sabine, as we know, doesn't want the right to rule Mandalore. Like, she gave it up to Bo-Katan, who at the time had no problem taking it from Sabine for no reason, but I guess just maybe the circumstances. And, you know, now we're looking at this potential this character who's going to come back, but, you know, we're looking at this potential character who currently wields the darksaber that could rule this planet, and I'm into it. You know, like, I think, you know, even though he's not part of the original Mandalore race and everything, you know, the perspective of Mandalorians fighting Jedi and everything, you know, that obviously has been changing. And Bo-Katan herself allied with the Jedi in the end of the Clone Wars. So,
and the Rebels, the last big fight was against the Empire.
Right. Yeah.
The Mandalorians teamed up with the only remaining Jedi.
Yeah, Ezra and and
Kanan.
yeah. So yeah,
I'm not sure if Ahsoka. They worked with Ahsoka anyway, so it doesn't matter if she was there or not.
Yeah, Bo-Katan's worked with Ahsoka before. So yeah, I mean, like, it's interesting that, you know, talking about this history of this lightsaber that's gone through the motions. Like, now we're looking at a potential leader that is not only an ally to the Jedi and can unite Mandalorians with, you know, the Jedi kind of thing, but that would just be awesome, right? Like, it would be really cool to, I don't know. I mean, I don't know about you, but like, seeing Din Djarin in that shiny metal Beskar armor, holding the darksaber while it was on and everything,
it's pretty badass.
Awesome. It was so cool, and I was like, this
Space
is
Knight.
Yeah, like Space Knight. Like, this is where Star Wars thrives in the space fantasy genre, right here. Like, you know, we're looking at a knight in shining armor wielding a sword.
I know, right? It's such a basic concept, but it's also so cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, what are your thoughts on it?
I agree. I feel like Din Djarin's kind of being groomed to take that position just because now he can unite all the different clans, because he's kind of like the outsider. He's now getting to know his original upbringing, which seems like they might follow the original Mandalorian culture. at least from what we know from the EU, because they've been off kind of in their own cell. They've kind of been outside of all this other stuff that's been happening. Like they seem like they had nothing to do with like when the Mandalorians, when they were at peace or whatever, they're all pacifists. He wasn't part of Death Watch, and Death Watch was kind of villainous. So it's a good question, but I don't know. I think Bo-Katan's gonna fight him for it because I don't think she's willing to bend a knee to him yet. He's gonna have to prove himself more, I think. Yeah. And with Sabine coming into it, like I'm curious how that's gonna change the dynamic, because she's obviously gonna side with Bo-Katan because she has no idea who Din Djarin is.
Right. And she is part of the Mandalorian culture that Bo-Katan, the same one that Bo-Katan is part of. Mm-hmm. Kind of the main one, the one that we're familiar with from the animated shows. So yeah, it's true. Like, and Din Djarin being part of that Splinter Cell doesn't really care about the darksaber. He's like, oh, you can have it. And, you know, and yet Bo-Katan's perspective of it is it has to be earned. And I don't know. I think the reason why she took it from Sabine in the first place is because she found it in a cave. So it's like, okay, well, it didn't need to be one in the first place. Let's just be okay with that. That's just how I look at it. But it is kind of an interesting concept that we could see unfold.
And we had brought this up before, talking with Bryce as well, that why can't Din Djarin and Bo-Katan just have a duel and not to the death? It's like a sparring duel. And that's the thing. Like, we could see something like that happen just to quickly resolve the situation. I don't think this thing is gonna. Well, okay, so it could throw us a curveball, and then going forward in season 3 of Mandalorian, we're looking at Bo-Katan and her owls coming after Din Djarin as enemies to get the darksaber, to, you know, have to kill him to earn the thing. But I don't see that happening. Like I could maybe see her, I don't know, being okay with him having the darksaber. And yeah, I could see that being part of her story arc over the next season. Yeah, I could see. And the fact that her sister never looked at the darksaber as the right to rule like she was the Duchess of Mandalore and didn't have it, so obviously she didn't care. So she also was trying to get away from tradition as much as possible.
Yeah, she was. Yeah, and Bo-Katan by the end of the Clone Wars says, "I never understood my sister's like." She still doesn't get it by the end of the show, even after fighting back to get Mandalore. She still doesn't understand Satine's outlook on the rulership of their home planet, because it's not based in their roots as warriors. But if you dig back even further behind the fact that they're warriors with the Jedi, or enemies with the Jedi at least, you know, Tarre Vizla is a Mandalorian who became a Jedi, and that's his lightsaber. So like, you know, you go back far enough and you eventually hit peace. Just one word, plain and simple. And, you know, the idea that someone holding the darksaber that doesn't necessarily worship this thing, but is able to use it, and he's a good leader, and he has good relations with the Jedi, you know, I can dig it. Like I can get into that. And maybe along the way, along his journey, maybe he'll discover more about his own culture that he didn't know before. Because season 2 really threw us that curveball. Was like, oh, you're actually part of a splinter group called the Watch, not necessarily the actual Mandalorians. So, or at least one of the big houses of the main clans of Mandalore that look at the darksaber as, you know,
there's definitely more to learn in regards to that. And I'm pretty curious to see that, find out it's funny because I think we talked about this a bit last week, but the idea of the Watch is basically an in-universe cult that holds the original Boba Fett concepts.
Yeah, and it's also
the man with no face.
It's also kind of a way to this is the way, you know. It's also kind of a way for them to live out
fans, right? That's fans talking about how Jango. You can't see Jango's face. You're like, Boba, we didn't want to know. That is the way. We need to He needs to be anonymous.
Yeah, it's just the way of the fans. Yeah. So the way though is kind of it's a different way of being Mandalorian for sure, but I can see it being kind of a group that spun off of maybe what the Death Watch believed at one point, but then decided to do their own thing, and they have their own set of outlooks on the way that Mandalorian culture should be, right? So unlike the Vizsla clan, and by extension other clans that looked at the leader of Mandalore to have the darksaber at certain points in history, the Watch doesn't care about any of that, and it's not even something Din Djarin even really knows about. And you know, unlike Mandalorians that we're familiar with, like Bo-Katan and Sabine and stuff. Well, even Satine, who doesn't even wear Mandalorian armor, like he's got the whole thing of like, yeah, no one can see my face, always wearing the armor. You never see him in anything else. It's like, it was shameful for him to put on that stormtrooper costume, right? The stormtrooper outfit.
Yeah.
So yeah, like we're looking at a very different set of outlooks on life. And Bill Burr's character, always forget his name. Mayfeld. Thank you. He questions those morals, and he really puts them to the test, right?
Cultural norms, I guess.
Yeah, cultural norms. Yeah, and he really kind of puts his belief system to the test. He's like, you know, he kind of like makes Din Djarin think about why he keeps his helmet on all the time and everything. And when it really comes down to what he needs to do, he ends up taking the helmet off and does the facial scanner thing so he can get the information to then later save Grogu, right? So like eventually he's got his breaking point.
I still think they're going to do something with that because the Empire has his face scanned. So that means at some point they're going to release it, and he's going to be... I think the other Mandalorians are going to come after him from his cult, like the Watch. I bet you that's after season 3. I still think that's... How could they do that and then not do anything? So it's got to go somewhere.
It's a possibility that maybe the darksaber will be used in his hands as leadership for the Watch, and then Din Djarin is the one to introduce new outlooks on their way, right? Maybe he's the one to like change them. Yeah, this is now the way. This is how I'm running the show, right?
This is the new way.
Plus, he's got the attention of Bo-Katan's version of Mandalorians, which look at the darksaber as the right to rule. So, you know, he's got both groups' attention. Mm-hmm. He's the perfect candidate, honestly, like if you ask me. So, yeah, but I mean,
interesting to see for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously this weapon coming from, again, a character who became a Jedi first and foremost it's a very interesting path.
The Jedi Mandalorian though, Tarre Vizla, he must have held some sort of relationship with the Mandalorians though, or else they never would have. They thought he just vanished and they never saw him again, right? But they knew that he had a lightsaber. They knew where it was. They knew like that all this existed. So there also must be a storyline there where maybe he went back to Mandalore as like some sort of ambassador, trying to make peace between them. I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah, no, that's a possibility. I mean, we're talking about a timeline in which even the Jedi's code was probably a lot different back then as well. You know, being over 1,000 years or more, you know, before Phantom Menace.
The timeline we are right now in the High Republic? Is that 1,000 years?
No. High Republic is very young. It's only about 200 years before Phantom Menace.
Okay, I keep
so
thinking
it's like way after. No, it's like the Mandalorian Wars, I believe, it's before Old Republic times. It goes back that far.
Okay.
So yeah.
I'm wondering if you're thinking that the darksaber, Rule of Mandalore, if that's going to have any influence on the Boba Fett series.
No, I mean, I don't think so, but where Boba's trajectory is headed with taking over of Jabba, it's possible that him becoming his own crime boss and stuff, right, could in fact bring repercussions to Din Djarin, right, who's a mercenary bounty hunter. It could bring repercussions to the circles that they share, as common bounty hunters go, right? And so, yeah, like we're looking at a show about a bounty hunter and a show about another bounty hunter who's no longer a bounty hunter, and he's kind of moving up in the world, or moving down in the underworld.
This is a total random idea that's probably never going to happen, and I'd say it's a very small chance. What if Book of Boba Fett, Boba becomes a crime lord, and then he gets in the way of Din Djarin and Mandalorian, and Boba becomes a villain in The Mandalorian season 3 as a crime boss.
That is a possibility. I mean, well, the fact that crime bosses are the ones that employ bounty hunters in the first place. So
yeah, but Din Djarin's on a righteous kind of quest right now, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah. Technically, he finished the main quest. He handed over Grogu, but now he's probably going to do this whole Mandalorian thing.
Yeah. And here's actually, yeah. And to build on top of that, this whole Mandalorian thing that you reference as maybe the next quest that he goes on could potentially be leading to a certain point in which the Jedi / the New Republic plus Din Djarin and the Mandalorians create a formidable army against Thrawn and his 6th fleet or 7th fleet or whatever he calls his.
I could totally see that happening. Do you think they'll work with Boba in that case?
Here's the thing. That Rangers of the New Republic show has now officially been canceled. So the headline's been out. It was only about an episode or two ago that we were talking about this. And, at the time it was unconfirmed. It was just, as I think you mentioned it was just off the production schedule, because I said it was canceled and you said, well, technically it's not officially canceled yet.
Yeah, I heard it was shelved.
A week went by and they officially canceled it now. So now we can officially say it's officially canceled, but
that's a shame. It was such a cool concept.
It is. Yeah, it is a shame. The plot line of that show would have likely gotten into that territory of the Empire's out there, we need to build resources. We're a demilitarized republic right now, or don't have much of one, because the rebellion kind of now has to control the galaxy, right? Like it's a huge
they don't have the manpower.
Footprint. Yeah, they can't fill that shoe literally, because that's what causes this thriving of the underworld to happen, which is what we're going to have in the Book of Boba. So
in the EU, and I think it's canon now as well, is the rebels start using Star Destroyers, but they modify them so they fly like sideways, so they don't look like Star Destroyers anymore. And I think that's canon as well, because they don't have the production or anything to make their own ships, so they just use the Empire's production lines to make a modified version of the Imperial stuff. Yeah,
so it is canon now that what they did there,
right?
Yes, yeah. Project something Hawk. It was introduced in the Star Wars Squadrons. Starhawk. Yes, is it Starhawk?
Is that right? Is it that cheesy? It's not Star Fox. I'm just Starhawk.
Yeah, you're right. It is Project Starhawk.
How in the world did I get that?
Lucky cat.
I just remembered Hawk.
Oh man,
that's funny.
So Project Starhawk was introduced in Star Wars Squadrons, I believe, and Project Starhawk, also known as the Starhawk Project, was a New Republic starship project to develop Starhawk class battleships, which were kind of a prototype thing. But the Starhawk class battleship was later used in the Galactic Civil War. It was produced at the Nadiri dockyards, and there was 3 variants. There was like a prototype, there was a Mark 1 and a Mark 2. You can definitely buy them in Star Wars X-Wing models. I'm pretty sure you can buy at least one of them in that format. And one of them participated in the Battle of Jakku, so they were mentioned in the Battlefront 2 campaign. And many years later, they were used by the Resistance as load lifters, and then they were destroyed by the the Supremacy, the First Order ship that eventually gets chopped up in half by the, hyperspace trick or whatever. So that was, they were also, they showed up in the Aftermath Life Debt book, the Aftermath trilogy by Chuck Wendig. Like, they've been around for a little while, and the whole thing kind of, they're made just after Return of the Jedi. The fact that they were at Jakku means they were made around the same time as, 6 months after Return of the Jedi kind of thing. So very early on, about 4 to 5 years prior to when The Mandalorian takes place, which is, and now Book of Boba, probably 6 years. So yeah, we're looking at that about that time frame. But yeah, what did you picture Rangers of the New Republic to be?
I had kind of pictured it as like one of those old school week to week, like undercover cop or whatever, like maybe like a Starsky and Hutch kind of series. Yeah, I could see that happening. I think the underlying plot line of Thrawn coming back and all that would have been worked in there somehow as well. But the most important thing to take away from the cancellation of that show is that underlying plot is not going away, and it'll be worked into these other shows somehow in some form. But yeah, that show would have been pretty cool to see. And, Thrawn might have a lot up his sleeve. He might have an army of dark troopers or something like that. We don't know. Maybe Moff Gideon was in cahoots with him or something like that. And dark troopers are insanely powerful. Like they're lightsaber. Well, the lightsabers can take them, but they're blaster resistant and all that kind of stuff. Did they explain that? It's not Beskar. It's got to be like Cartosis or something, right?
It's something else. It's not Beskar because lightsaber can cut through it. Okay. So, like, Luke was able to cut them down, but the blaster bolts that Din Djarin shot at them were just refract right off of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they're made of something that the Rebellion or / New Republic is going to have a very, very hard time fighting against, and they're not armored up like Din Djarin is, and he barely took down one. So, I think what we're looking at here is possibly a leadership of Din Djarin wielding the darksaber with an army of Mandalorians behind him to help the New Republic fight off the Empire that's come back. That's what I think.
I think that's just a theory. Likely. Yeah, it's all going to come together, I think.
Yeah.
You're probably right on that.
Yeah, I think it's all going to come together like that, but who knows? Gonna wait and see.
Yeah, I'm hoping so, because that means we're going to fall in line very closely with the old EU Thrawn books. So Thrawn in that series was working with a Jedi he was an ex-Jedi who survived the Jedi Purge, but over this long period of time living on his own, this Jedi actually went insane. So he was mentally insane.
Which Jedi was this?
I'm trying to remember his name, but I know he clones Luke. And it has cloned Luke as his apprentice.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, like you're talking about the old guy, right? The old guy on the cover.
He's like a wizard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was like a crazy, like a Force user that definitely wasn't a Jedi anymore. The original Heir to the Empire cover has him on the front with his hands spread out wide. Mm-hmm. Yep, is that right? Yeah. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Is it no, yeah. Joris Kaboth? Yeah, Joris Kaboth.
Yeah, that's the name.
Or Joris Kabaoth or something like that. So
it's something like that. I can't remember pronunciation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's an old kind of mystic wizard Jedi who's gone insane. And so he kind of served as like the Sith-esque character. So It was Thrawn and him. So Thrawn was kind of like the leader of the Empire, and he was working with Kabath or whatever his name is.
Right.
I'm trying to remember his purpose other than creating clone Luke, though. Because Thrawn did all the heavy lifting.
Yeah. Thrawn was like the military guy, and then Joris was like he had a good presence for being like the Force enemy, right?
I think it's just something for Luke to fight. I think that was the main purpose of him. Like, as far as like story points, I don't think he did a lot.
So it says here that he had something to do with Outbound Flight as well, but
That's also
he
a Zahn
eventually
novel.
he eventually falls to the dark side of the Force and attempts to kill Thrawn at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And he dies himself when a Chiss radiation bomb explodes on the Outbound Flight, which I guess he's on, maybe. Darth Sidious would later use the recovered samples of Caboth's DNA as a template for the insane clone known as Joruus C'baoth. So he is basically a clone of a Jedi who once fought with the Republic during the Clone Wars, who took place on the Outbound Flight project, which ended up being destroyed. And his clone was not perfect, I guess. Yeah. And the clone became a guardian of Emperor Palpatine's private treasury, later worked with Grand Admiral Thrawn during his campaign. So
there you go. So I have a feeling that he's probably not going to show up, but he could be a force wielding villain for Ahsoka to fight. So maybe
it's possible. I mean, like, we saw a character very similar to this in Jedi Fallen Order. Did you play through that whole game?
No, I never got it to run my PC. Yeah, unfortunately, it kept crashing on me.
So there was a character named Taron Malicos, and Taron Malicos was a Jedi who served during the Jedi Order, and after the Purge, he escaped to Dathomir, and he ended up becoming a leader of the Night Brothers by killing Viscus, who Viscus is like one of Darth Maul's brothers, and he was the leader, or the main guy at the time leading the Night Brothers. And then he influences the Dathomirian Night Sister Mirren to learn her magic. So he combines the arts of the Force with Night Sister magic, and creates a pretty interesting enemy for Cal Kestis to fight in the game. But he says when Grievous annihilated all the Night Sisters, I think he kind of took advantage of the fact that Dathomir was kind of in ruins when he escaped there. Like, there was not much alive on the planet at the time. So makes way for like a perfect guy like him that's got a lot of power and everything to eventually he gets corrupted. He turns dark, starts controlling those around him. Very typical classic Force user gone bad storyline. Eventually though he does die, and Kestis and Mirren actually take him out together. But a character like that pops up in a game like that, and he's an old guy, wields the Force, wields Night Sister magic, wields lightsabers. Like, it's a very kind of video gamey thing to kind of just throw at you. But when you're playing the campaign and stuff, it's like, it's not that hard to buy because they root it in the canon of the events that you're kind of really familiar with.
And the game itself is canon, is it not?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So like if they did throw a character at us, like, that, what's that?
Joruus C'baoth.
Joruus C'baoth, yeah, like him, or Malicos, whatever character it is that they introduce for the first time to be like a Force presence enemy for Ahsoka or Luke or whoever it is to end up fighting, even Din Djarin now that he's got a darksaber, whatever it is, it's gonna be good, and they're gonna make it make sense, and I guarantee you, it's not gonna be as frustrating as seeing Palpatine come back.
I have to say that's probably the least likely thing I think is going to happen. We still have to see the robot version of Palpatine's face.
That's true.
I don't know if he's around. I think that thing blew up at the Battle of Jakku, though. So we'll see.
Oh, the Sentinel things, yeah, those are long gone, I think. But man, it would be cool to see one again. Just a messenger hologram thing.
Palp's face. And then trying to convince everyone he's still alive. which ironically became true.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But when that was written, it wasn't supposed to be true.
Yeah.
At least as far as I know.
Well, I was just having a conversation with someone about this today, and at some point I'll have to bring her on the show. She's been wanting to come on for a while. But is there any last minute things you want to bring up about the darksaber, Mandalorian Season 3, or of course our featured character, our spotlight character today, Tarre Vizla? Anything like that?
No, just counting down the days. 16 more days and we get the book of Boba Fett, so that'll be pretty cool.
Wow. Crazy. Been waiting a long time for this, so a lot of people excited, but...
Sounds good.
All right, I'll see you in the next one, man.
Got a blast.
All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning into the show, and I can't say this enough, but every time you share the show, it helps. It helps. Leaving a review, even better. Put those 5 stars down there and drop a comment if you're on the iTunes platform or an iPhone. If you use Apple Podcasts, that would be awesome. Even sharing the link to the podcast to a friend, just give them the recommendation of your choice of Star Wars podcast, and let them know that Star Wars Escape Pod is out there for them if they're a Star Wars fan, and even if they're not, and if they're looking to explore the franchise and learn a little more about it. I hope we've got a decent amount of episodes that might cater to fans like that as well, or so we call them yet to be fans. So yeah, at some point we'll have to do some episodes that are very much geared for people who've even never seen Star Wars before. I don't think we've done a whole lot of those, so yeah, we'll be sure to hit that target as well at some point. But if you guys have any interest in following us on Instagram or Twitter, you can do it at SW Escape Podcast, and our email is swescapepodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to check out all of that stuff, the links in the description, the Discord. Make sure you join that. That's you don't want to miss out on all the cool RSS feeds in there for Star Wars information. And we're really looking forward to the book of Boba Fett and all the commentary tracks that we're going to be... after shows that we're going to be doing after those episodes premiere on a week-to-week basis. We'll catch you in the next episode, guys, and may the Force be with you.